I didn't know what I was inheriting when my great-uncle Raymond left me the property. The lawyer called it an asset. The county called it critical infrastructure, and the locals called it the lake. What it really was, though, was a private earthen dam holding back, a freshwater reservoir that fed half the valley during dry years. Raymond had built it decades earlier with permits, surveyors, and a quiet understanding with the town. He maintained it. They respected it. Simple. That understanding collapsed the day I received a certified letter from the Canyon Ridge Homeowners Association. Their development wrapped around the upper basin like a diamond bracelet. $30 million of glass, stone, and entitlement. They claimed the reservoir was a community amenity, that access roads crossed my land, and that I was obligated to turn over control for safety and property values. I laughed until the laughter stopped. Attached were maps, minutes, and a resolution declaring emergency authority. Before I could respond, their contractors cut my locks, posted HOA signage, and restricted the spillway. They seized my reservoir with clipboard confidence and zero jurisdiction. I spent weeks learning what Raymond already knew. Water law is older than subdivisions and rights run downhill. The HOA's insurance didn't cover the dam. Their engineer hadn't inspected it. Their resolution conflicted with state statute. Most importantly, their homes depended on controlled releases that only the owner could authorize. So I documented everything. When they ignored my notice, I did the one thing Raymond warned about in his journals. I shut the outflow to minimum legal release. No flooding, no drama, just the law. Within days, lawns yellowed. Fountains fell silent. Appraisals paused. Panic crept through board meetings. They had taken my reservoir. I had simply reminded them who owned the dam. The county watermaster returned my call that Friday, voice tight but professional. He confirmed the recorded easements, the maintenance logs, and the chain of title. He also warned me that HOAs often bet on intimidation, not facts. I watched sunset burn orange across the water and understood the leverage I held. Not money, not malice, just control over a scarce resource. By nightfall, emails stacked up. Threats softened into requests and requests into pleas. The dam stood quiet, doing what it always had. While the neighborhood learned a lesson about ownership they never expected. Raymond's handwriting echoed in my head. Water makes neighbors, but law keeps them honest. And I decided to be both patient and precise as the next move formed. Morning would bring lawyers, meetings, and headlines, but the first battle was already won in silence and paperwork alone. For now, anyway. By Monday morning, Canyon Ridge looked less like a luxury enclave and more like a shaken boardroom with driveways. SUVs idled in cul-de-sacs as neighbors compared notes, irrigation schedules, and rumors. Someone leaked that the reservoir wasn't insured under the HOA's master policy. Someone else said a buyer walked from a $7 million listing after learning water access was under review. The phrase spread like a rash. My phone finally rang with a number I recognized. The HOA president, a former management consultant whose confidence had been sharpened by decades of never being told no. He opened with concern and ended with assumption. "We all want what's best for the community," he said, as if ownership were a suggestion. I told him I wanted the same thing, and that what was best for the community was respecting the law. He proposed a temporary operating agreement. I proposed restoring my locks and signage. He suggested mediation. I suggested compliance. We danced politely, but the music had changed. Their attorney followed up with a thicker letter, heavy on urgency and light on precedent. I forwarded it to the county watermaster and the state dam safety office, attaching photos of the HOA's unauthorized modifications. By Wednesday, inspectors were scheduled. By Thursday, the HOA's contractor quietly removed their signage before anyone could photograph it again. That afternoon, I drove the perimeter road Raymond had cut himself, boots crunching gravel he'd chosen for drainage. His journals had names and dates, handshakes with farmers downstream, flood years, drought years, the one time he'd opened the spillway early to save a neighbor's orchard. He wasn't sentimental, he was meticulous. I followed his system. Logs updated, gauges photographed, releases recorded to the minute. If this became a fight, it would be a clean one. The inspection wasn't kind to the HOA. Their engineer admitted, on record, that he'd never evaluated the dam under state criteria. Their emergency authority dissolved when the statute was read aloud. The inspector's conclusion was blunt. Restore control to the owner immediately or face penalties. The president didn't argue. He didn't need to. The silence said enough. But the real damage had already started. Appraisers flagged water uncertainty as a material risk. Lenders paused approvals. A developer who'd planned Phase 3 withdrew his letter of intent. No water meant no landscaping approvals, no certificates of occupancy. Glass walls reflected stress instead of sunsets. That evening, I received a different call. A homeowner, not a board member, asked if I'd consider a long-term access agreement. Her voice carried fear, not arrogance. I told her yes, under conditions that protected the dam and honored the law. Word traveled fast when it wasn't shouted. By the weekend, the HOA scheduled a special meeting. The agenda said, water rights discussion. The subtext said, we miscalculated. I didn't attend. I didn't need to. Control had returned quietly, the way it should have been handled from the start. Still, the lesson wasn't over. Power tests itself until it meets a boundary, and the dam, patient and unmovable, had become exactly that. The special meeting changed everything, though I only learned about it later through recordings and forwarded minutes. What began as a routine HOA gathering turned into something closer to an intervention. Homeowners demanded answers the board didn't have, and the board finally admitted what they'd gambled on, that I'd be intimidated, slow, or eager to settle. I was none of those things. By the following week, real consequences surfaced. A pending sale on the ridge collapsed after the buyer's attorney requested written confirmation of permanent water rights. The HOA couldn't provide it. Another homeowner discovered their insurer was reassessing wildfire coverage due to uncertain water supply for suppression. That phrase, uncertain water supply, became the neighborhood's nightmare. I received 3 proposals in 2 days. The first offered a modest lease payment in exchange for perpetual control. I declined. The second suggested forming a joint authority, half mine, half theirs. I declined again. The third was different. It acknowledged my ownership, accepted regulatory oversight, and proposed a limited, revocable access agreement tied to maintenance funding and downstream obligations. It was, in short, reasonable. Before responding, I did what Raymond always did. I checked downstream. I met with 2 farmers and the town's public works director. I showed them the proposed terms and asked one question. Would this protect your water? When they nodded, I nodded too. But the HOA wasn't done unraveling. At the next board election, 3 directors resigned. One cited health reasons. Another said she was moving sooner than planned. The president didn't run again. Power shifted quickly when confidence evaporated. Their replacements were quieter, more careful, and far more interested in cooperation than control. The market reacted just as fast. Listings stayed up longer. Price reductions crept in, first discreet, then obvious. A broker friend told me buyers were factoring in worst-case scenarios. Trucked water, emergency assessments, legal uncertainty. On paper, the homes were still worth millions. In practice, they were fragile. I signed the access agreement at the county office, not the clubhouse. The terms were clear. I retained full control of the dam and reservoir. The HOA received conditional access for irrigation and fire mitigation, contingent on compliance, funding, and inspections. Any breach reverted rights instantly. No drama. No ambiguity. Water flowed again, lawns recovered, and the panic eased. But the damage lingered. Confidence, once cracked, doesn't reseal easily. The neighborhood had learned that luxury doesn't override law, and ownership isn't a vote. One evening, I stood on the spillway as the sun dropped low, the reservoir glassy and calm. Raymond's system worked because it respected limits, of land, of water, of people. The HOA had tested those limits and lost millions in perceived value for the lesson. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt settled. The dam wasn't a weapon or a bargaining chip. It was responsibility made concrete. And now everyone understood that the quietest force in the valley wasn't the board, the market, or the lawyers. It was the water, held patiently in place, waiting for someone to remember who was meant to steward it. Months later, Canyon Ridge looked the same to anyone driving through. The stone gates still gleamed, the views still sold themselves, and the reservoir still caught the sky like a mirror. But underneath, the neighborhood had changed in a way no renovation could fix. The illusion of control was gone. The final appraisal reports told the story quietly. Comparable sales excluded Canyon Ridge entirely or adjusted values downward with footnotes about water governance risk. One analyst estimated the collective impact at nearly $30 million in lost value, not because the water disappeared, but because certainty did. The HOA tried to rebrand the situation as a partnership. Newsletters used words like collaboration and stewardship. I didn't object. I just kept the logs, attended inspections, and followed the agreement to the letter. Trust isn't built with language. It's built with consistency. A year after the seizure attempt, the county updated its emergency response plan. The dam was listed clearly as a privately owned structure with regulated access. That single sentence closed a loophole the HOA had exploited. It also protected me. Sometimes victory is a line of text no one notices until it matters. I received one last call from the former HOA president. He didn't apologize. He didn't argue. He asked how Raymond had known to structure things the way he did. I told him the truth. Raymond grew up during a drought. He understood scarcity. People who don't understand scarcity confuse convenience with entitlement. Downstream, the farmers had a good year. The town secured a grant for monitoring upgrades tied to my maintenance reports. Even the HOA benefited. Fire insurance stabilized once inspections became routine. Everyone gained something, but only after accepting limits. Standing at the dam that evening, I realized the inheritance wasn't the reservoir itself. It was the framework around it. Patience, documentation, and respect for systems older than any luxury development. The HOA had tried to seize an object. They underestimated the power of process. The homes at Canyon Ridge weren't worthless in the literal sense. People still lived there. Life went on. But the premium they once commanded, the assumption that wealth could smooth over fundamentals, was gone. Permanently. Water doesn't care about square footage or views. It responds to gravity, gates, and law. When those align, everything downstream works. When they don't, even the most expensive houses sit uneasy on their hills. I locked the gate, checked the gauges, and walked back up the road Raymond built. The dam held. The valley breathed. And the lesson settled in, as solid as the earth beneath my boots. Ownership isn't about taking, it's about tending. And when someone forgets that, the cost is always higher than they expect. Enjoying this story about water rights, power, and what happens when entitlement meets the law. Subscribe to follow more real-world conflict stories where ownership, leverage, and consequences collide. If this one made you think, give it a like. And drop a comment below. Do you think the HOA ever believed they could actually win this?